Welcome to Women Winning Divorce. I am your host, Heather Quick. I am an attorney, entrepreneur, author, and founder of Florida Women's Law Group, the only divorce firm for women by women. I love thinking big, thinking outside the box, creating creative solutions for women, and empowering women to win in all aspects of their life. Our approach at Florida Women's Law Group is to provide women with a strategy to not only achieve their objectives, but win at life. I believe that what may show up as adversity is simply an opportunity to change and improve your life. In each episode, I sit down with innovative professionals and leaders who are focused on how you can be your best self before, during, and after divorce. In these conversations, we are looking at how women can win at life. I have the unique opportunity to meet women when they are at a transition period of life. But that is only the beginning to becoming your best self and winning at life on your terms. With our guests, we enjoy the opportunity to explore ways all women can win and enhance their life, no matter where they are in their journey. Because divorce is just a point in life, not the end and not what defines you, rather a catalyst for your growth.
Welcome to Women Winning Divorce. Each week, we discuss issues including divorce, custody, alimony, narcissism, mediation, and so many other family law issues to provide insight on the journey of women winning divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. And today, it is my pleasure to welcome Melissa Dionne, owner and licensed clinical social worker of Jack's Beach Counseling here in Jacksonville, Florida. Well, at the beach, which is a great place to, of course, be. So welcome to the show, Melissa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here and happy to talk about this very fun subject.
Wow. Yes. And I know our listeners are wondering, what are we talking about? Oh, we have so much to talk about. And we are talking about narcissism, specifically as it relates to those that are going through divorce and maybe what you will see in those relationships and maybe how it affects you in a divorce. Now, that's a lot in and of itself, and we may not get to it all. So Melissa may be asked to come back so that we can continue. But what we know now, and just so you know, listeners, like, it's been amazing, talking about this topic even before the show started. It's got my mind going in so many directions and so many questions that I know all of our listeners are going to find fascinating. So, Melissa, in both our professional lives, we've seen firsthand how emotionally trying divorce can be. And I would love to get some insight as to why you've chosen this field and these particular issues as your practice.
Such a good question. And it's kind of evolved, if you want to know the truth. This isn't where I started my practice, but 2 divorces later, 3 kids later, yes, you kind of got to get down in the nitty gritty and figure out what is going on. And so I would say for you, to listeners, that part of my journey in doing this is I have 3 girls, and how narcissism shows up and affects, their day-to-day life and for their kids and their kids. So my passion isn't just about my patients. My passion is about my family and just life in general.
I love that. And, that's what gives us more passion and purpose too, right? When we have so many reasons why we do what we do. Absolutely. And yeah, and when it touches you and you have personal experience with these things, it just gives you a deeper insight and I think such an ability for you as a professional, even for me and our attorneys, to hear our clients in a different way, but also just gives you so much more empathy and a real understanding of what they're going through. Go ahead, please.
No doubt. And I was going to touch on this even before we talk about what is narcissism. As a treating clinician and the research that I have done, Sandra Brown is a pioneer of narcissism, and survivors is what I call it. The women, sometimes it's men, but a lot of times it's women, the survivors of this. And it is thought that if you haven't experienced it yourself as a clinician, that treating clinicians miss it all the time. Personally, I have been also in that position where 4 clinicians on board here locally, and not one said one single thing to me about either being a narcissist. So it shows up differently. And so as I was talking to you about, how do I define this? How do I, wrap my hands around what it is that we're trying to talk about here? And in the clinical world, right, NPD is a personality disorder. And so narcissistic personality disorder. And the characteristics of that people would see as, I guess, talking about it as more in the space of, is somebody a narcissist? Not necessarily diagnosing them, but characteristics of. The things that are similar, I would say, are lack of empathy is one of the biggest ones. That's like, hands down, one of the major components of, does somebody have empathy? How do you figure out if somebody has empathy? We're going to touch on that later. But it's a combination of, in the clinical world, traits of grandiosity, attention seeking, viewing oneself as exceptional, superficial relationships, not stable over time, often use of drugs are mixed in. And there's a lot of anxiety and depression wrapped in that.
And that's a lot, just in and of itself. And I appreciate that, kind of to get us into the topic, Melissa, because it's just so much more than, I'm divorcing a narcissist or I'm married to a narcissist, because that may or may not even be the right way. I'm sure it's not the way you talk about it clinically, but of course, for the rest of us who are not clinicians, even as us as attorneys, we're going to use more obviously lay terms that may or may not truly be correct, but because that's like what we're talking about. There's a viewpoint that we have from the legal side, with our clients, but then you have a totally different viewpoint. I mean, there may be some intersection, but as that mental health care professional, obviously, one, you have, clinical side, but then for, I think what's helpful, certainly for our listeners to know is, well, how do I even know, right? Because, if we get too detailed in diagnoses or clinical terms, they're going to be like, I don't even know how to know if I am in a relationship with a narcissist. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I found it fascinating before we started that you were talking about covert versus overt, and there's just like, so many things that break it down. But I think that's a great place to start, because that makes sense to me, covert versus overt, and maybe for our listeners just to get a sense of that as a starting point.
And so that's a starting point, but it's even a little bit more complicated in that there are sadistic narcissists, there are malignant narcissists. So to talk about overt and covert, it's just like the word says. Overt is like, they will overtly show you that they do not have empathy. Covert is they wear a mask, they pretend like they have empathy, but they really don't. And so,
can they keep that up? I'm just going to ask you, right? Like, how long can they keep that mask up with you? Because I bet they're pretty good at it.
Right. They're pretty good at it. And typically what I would say, and this is personal experience and what walks in my office, typically the year of, especially when you're married, it usually gets pretty much, once you're married, there's something about a covert narc that they seem to think that they don't have to behave the same way that they did before. So this is where typically do red flags show up in the beginning of the dating, which I talked to you about, right? There's the cycle of narcissism, and it's actually called the narcissistic cycle of abuse. So that cycle, when you enter into it unknowingly, is when they're love bombing you and they're idealizing you and saying you're amazing and they're a great boyfriend and they're getting you coffee and they're saying all kinds of things about, things that you would want in a relationship, and showing up and being responsible and being respectful, and just typical. If I were to give, there are typical characteristics of a relationship, a healthy relationship, which are things like loyalty and commitment and honesty and integrity, that those things are showing up in the beginning. But
right, because the relationship wouldn't start, right? I mean, it has to start somewhere. And so they gotta make you believe those things are there, right? That when we're talking the covert, like you believe they're there.
you believe that they're there, and a lot of people talk about that whole soulmate. He's my soulmate. He sees me like nobody else can see me. Those are like some typical things, and I'm going to say I fell in that trap too. So, in that stage of love bombing, there's a brain chemistry that goes on. And I think that that's one thing that a lot of clinicians miss. That brain chemistry is the start of the cycle. And when that brain chemistry starts, you're dumping oxytocin and all these great love hormones. And when that happens, you are bonding with them. You're bonding with them in a different way. And we'll talk about this later too, which is the trauma bond. So bonding with them initially, how long they make it through the cycle of not showing you red flags. We all admit that there's some red flags here and there, but we we're humans. People, yell at times. One of the things that shows up in the next stage is devaluing. And as you go from the love bombing to the devaluing, which isn't like a snap, it's like more insidious. It's a little bit at a time. You don't notice it. You're not thinking about it.
Now, let me ask you this real quick, because this is fascinating. I love this stuff. The devaluing, you think that happens like after the marriage? Do we say?
No, I think it starts at some point after love bombing. Let's just say love bombing is the first 6 months, but it could be up to a year. They could double love bomb you. Like they could love bomb you and then things aren't working out so well. And if you want to leave before they want you to leave, before they're ready to discard you, they'll love bomb you again. So to put that brain chemistry back in place so that you're like, oh no, they really do love and they really do care.
Then we got to pause there because you said brain chemistry. We talked a little bit about it beforehand. And in the listener, you got to let the listeners know, because I find this to be fascinating as well. Let's talk a little bit about that, because that makes sense, I think, then on this love bombing and how some people may be more susceptible to it than others.
And so there's a couple of characteristics stepping away from the codependent, what people thought were codependent women. It actually isn't that. They're calling them actually that covert narcissists want independent, high level empathy, high level, just relationship investment, cooperation kind of people. So narcissists that are covert typically go for strong, independent, what we call in this field super traits regarding being a survivor of narcissism. And Sandra Brown coined this, which is having blind trust. You start out giving trust, but then you kind of just give blind trust, loyalty, which then she retermed as insane loyalty, relationship investment, high level of tolerance for just life, and hyper empathy, that they have lots of empathy to give. And
so how does that work with this brain chemistry?
Right. So I'm going to back up 1 second and say the way that a covert narcissist tries to find out whether somebody has empathy or not is to kind of sell a story in the beginning of the relationship about things that have happened to them. So
they were the victim, right? Like of their first marriage.
Right.
And how awful their first wife was and all the things they did to them, right? Sorry, just throwing in an example.
But it can be a little trickier, Heather. And then it could be that the first wife is also a flying monkey. Flying monkey, that's a term. So the term is flying monkey, that they have established a layer of people in their life that they have brainwashed that they are this person. And this person is, how the covert narcissist shows up to the rest of the world, not to the people in the household, but to the rest of the world. So it depends on whether or not, and it can go either way. Is the ex a flying monkey, or is the ex has done horrible and terrible things to me? It's usually
understand. Okay.
So the brain chemistry starts in the beginning of the love bombing, and the love bombing is that oxytocin dumping. And I said to you before, sometimes women can be addicted to love.
Okay.
That's how the brain chemistry starts. So once that love bombing starts, the inability to separate yourself from that person is really difficult. If you were to compare it to asking a drug addict to not do their drug, it's not just like, it's how domestic violence happens too. There's trauma bonding and there's brain chemistry. And when you have those two things, it makes it really difficult to separate, even when they know bad things are happening and they are being hurt, even sometimes physically being hurt, right? Mm-hmm. But you don't always know. So you can be in the middle of this thing and even not know that you're in it. And then at what point do you know that you're in it? Meaning at what point, and it becomes the devaluing. It starts during that point when the red flags start showing up, which is they're saying mean things to you. They're having temper tantrums. They're fighting over anything and everything, and then gaslighting you and saying, altering your reality to say, well, this is really what happened. And you're like, no, like I see the text says this. They're like, no, that's not what happened. Mm-hmm. That devaluing stage is what can go on for years. I have some patients in their 60s and the marriage ended for different reasons, but they were devalued for 38 years.
Wow. And so for our listeners, I'm gonna try to kind of paraphrase, maybe clarify, because I think it's really an important point. So this brain chemistry is, you're saying like the love bombing is triggering something in your brain that your brain is like, I like this person truly loves me, and it's doing something for you physiologically that really is not in your conscious mind. Like you're really feeling this, right?
We're really feeling it, and it feels good, right? It feels good.
Yes.
It feels happy. You think it's normal. That doesn't change until the devaluing starts, that you're like, well, if you love me, why would you say I'm ugly or
I look fat or
or like just something that's, tearing down your self-esteem, right? Or even if it's just starting a fight for no reason. There's a lot of that, like a lot of they emotionally. So narcs can't handle when you criticize them. Their sensitivity to criticism is low because the minute you say something negative about them, their ego is like sand. And so they're going to come back at you. They're going to come back either yelling, angry, explosive. And typically
it's probably really mean, right? At a level that's really a cutting to your self-esteem, right? Like different than just an argument. Right. This is different. This isn't just an argument.
But it usually is still insidious. So it happens over time. So the arguments get bigger over time. It's like if he had his first meltdown of huge, great big meltdown, 6 months of dating, like you might be like, oh, that's really a red flag. Like something's really wrong here. Right. But it doesn't happen until probably that kind of meltdown until years into it. Like it is not just like when I say to you, well, did I say this? Like the point of this is that they are doing this with intention. They know the relationship is going to break up. For the most part, they know the relationship is going to break up because they're going to get tired of you. They're going to get bored. They're going to want to move on to a different supply. And narcissists need something called supply. Supply is what feeds their ego. So there's usually one main supply, meaning the person they're married to, the main relationship, but they usually have another many supplies on their phone out there. They need that positive, being made to feel good. That's what keeps their self-esteem, their mood in check. The minute you challenge to say, hey, like, why are you fighting about this? Or why, or just even saying that they did something wrong, they aren't able to handle their own just nervous system or method of handling emotional regulation is really poor.
Okay, this is a good, I don't want to pause. I don't want to stop at all, but we have to take a small break. But this is really good because we're going to keep on going. Listeners, take a moment, please, to subscribe to Women Winning Divorce, available on all major podcast platforms, and subscribe so that you can be aware of our most recent episodes, and we will be back in just a moment. All right, welcome back to Women Winning Divorce. We are discussing divorcing a narcissist with Melissa Dionne of Jacksonville Beach Counseling. And if you've been listening and enjoyed the show so far, please leave us a review so that others can find us. And you can also visit our website, womenwinningdivorce.com, to catch back episodes as well. All right, so this is so very interesting. And I think when we were last talking on the first segment, we started about how to identify a narcissist, and things that you would notice. I think like we talked and you discussed, starting with the love bombing.
The love bombing phase is the beginning of the lying phase. Everything they say and do is a lie. They don't actually love you. They want to own you. They want to control you. They want to have, a trophy wife. They want something that says, look at me. When I went back to you and said characteristics of, they're not seeking women who typically have, don't have themselves together, without kind of saying it, that they want them to have a great job and a successful life and a successful career, and people that kind of, gear themselves to having friends too that are successful. Like they want to be a part of the success train. So the love bombing phase, and this is what's so important about this, that no one knows when someone's lying. I mean, if you meet somebody and you can even have, when you meet them, maybe even some mutual friends, those friends are part of the flying monkeys. They don't know, like, he has put himself to be this person out in the world, but behind closed doors, or if you were to talk to all the people that they've had relationships with, there would be some common characteristics. And one is, when they leave, they just leave. They discard, they're done. So it's from the beginning, a brainwashing is what I've said to you. And the brainwashing is the love bombing. It's the lying. It's pretending that there's something that they're not. So when you go,
I think that's so important, because I hate to interrupt you, but I am, because, for our listeners, women who've been through this, like, you're not in the wrong. Like you said, I mean, those are strong words, like brainwashing, like, they are really skilled at doing this to you.
They are. And they've gone through lots of relationships where they've been very skilled at it. Like they just get better and better and better. And listen, the reason that they choose people who have lots of empathy is because they learn it better. Each relationship shows them how to have a skill that they don't actually naturally have. It's not in their brain. The brain scan shows, like, the disorder itself under psychopathy is thought to be more about neurology, a problem with your brain that it's a mixture, but a big portion of research says it's parts of your brain that are missing, that are missing for them. They can't get it back. It's neurology. So
they just don't have this empathy, but they've learned it because they're seeking people who are empathetic. Yes. So they can fake it for a period of time. They can fake it.
They can fake it.
That's the lying thing, because they're faking
lying. And it's not just lying about empathy. It's lying about everything, because at the end of the day, they're going to discard you. It's just a matter of what day. Either you're going to discard them because they're behaving poorly, or they're going to discard you because they're bored and they want to move on to something else, or you've pulled their mask off in front of everybody and embarrassed them. So the cycle of abuse, the narcissism.
And some people do stay in these relationships for many, many years, right? I mean, just for some of our listeners, because some women have been in these relationships for years.
So no doubt you're right. And I'm mistaken on saying that. You're right in that they would tell you they can't leave. They can't leave because they are so broken, so depressed, so anxious and anxious ridden that they think that they can't make it on their own, that they think that they physically can't survive. I mean, I've had cases where women have tried to commit suicide because it is at that extreme of there's no reason to live anymore because I can't handle the anxiety and depression. Sandra Brown, there's one thing I want to revisit while we're here. The 12 questions around, and I'm not going to touch on all of them, about how do you know you're in this kind of relationship?
Okay, let's save that for a minute, though.
Okay, all right.
We can, because that's really good. So then that'll keep our listeners on board, because I do want to talk about it. But you said there were phases and we're in like the lying phase. I'd like to finish that up because I find that fascinating as well.
So love bombing, we have that covered. This is where they're respecting your boundaries, they're adoring you, they're making empty promises, and you're their soulmate.
Right. So now then what comes next? What's the next phase?
Going on to the devaluing, or what they call the bullying phase. The narcissist fly. So, and they can't handle criticism well or abandonment well. And this is where, when you start getting into a longer relationship, that they're going to show you that they're going to gaslight you. They're going to start fights. They're going to say mean things about you. And this is where you may see them come into a rage stage. I mean, they can get just, when they're mad and they don't have emotional regulation, they can go straight into full on rage. And that sometimes is the first time that somebody is like, what's going on here? Like, how are you so angry? But then they think it's an anger problem.
Okay. So they're not really seeing it for as deep in as it is.
Yes.
And then, I mean, are there other stages after that, or is it like you got to leave, right? I mean, what happens?
So then typically what I like to say that there are 6 stages, but in reality, there are 3 stages. The next stage is the discard phase, the final phase. And it's where when they leave you, or you might leave them, but they leave you. It's to understand that you're not going to get closure from them. And most of the time when women get left, it is like a whiplash phase. So we call it, in the mental health world, cognitive dissonance. Your brain is going to like, wait, you love me. Remember in the love bombing phase when I was the greatest thing and you were respecting me and you went and got me coffee and we did great things together and we traveled together and had so much fun. But if you take the mask off, which is you show their true colors in some way, and that's a whole nother subject on taking the mask off, that when they're done, lights are out. You're not going to talk a narcissist into staying in a relationship. So game over for the narcissist. And the discard phase, we just got to come back to that because I'm going to keep moving. The next phase for the survivor is the I am so hurt phase, the after stages. This is the whiplash. This is the crying all night, every day. This is you are literally in that stage of addiction that you're like basically detoxing right now because your brain can't understand why that love, that brain chemistry that you're looking for him to be. Even if you were to break up a kind, loving person, they're not kind and loving. They're not going to show up that way.
Right.
They're going to be mean, hateful, make everything that you're going through extremely difficult. However, to the flying monkeys, they're going to present it as, I've done everything I can do. I am offering her the moon and back, but really behind closed doors, what he's doing is X, Y, and Z. And that's the game the entire time. This is the entire chess game the entire time. And then
there's the behind the veil, and that's really what's going on. But boy, there's this whole other movie being shown in persona that no one else can really see. They don't really want to see it. It's maybe superficial, but like they're buying everything he's selling as far as what is going on, right? Which leads to even more of being hurt for the woman in the suits, because like nobody really believes, like, no, it's not what you think. This has been so awful.
It's what reality, it's like back to the gaslighting, right? It's the quintessential of gaslighting. Like they're saying something is going on, but that's not really what was going on. That's not what really happened. So this detox phase though is the most, which is why a lot of times people will say they're not strong enough to leave. Horrific, hurtful, painful. And when you're in it, trying to find a clinician that is remotely trained in any of these stages, phases, and what you need to heal is next. I'm just going to say. So a lot of people go to the web and just try and find stuff that they can read about to try and make sense of like what just happened. And so the final 2 stages that I have, they call it in narc world, the hoovering stage, which is they still want to be near you. They rent an apartment 6 blocks from you, even though you've just went and bought your own house elsewhere. they will keep your number in their phone. They will still hold on to proceedings and drag things out as long, and you can speak on this, as long as they possibly can. But they'll say to the rest of the world, no, I'm trying to get it done and be done with it and fix it. And, I'm handling all my court stuff. But in reality, what they're doing is fighting every corner, every motion, everything, so that they can continue to be connected. Because for them, whether it's positive attention or negative attention, it's still attention. They much prefer the positive attention, but they like all attention. A lot of times they keep old numbers because they want to be able to reach out to all the old girlfriends, anybody that will give them attention, because that is what feeds them. That's what feeds a narcissist. And so the last is what we call the more aftermath. I call the more aftermath, the divorce, the difficulty with the kids, and you can speak on this too, but it's just really, really, really tough on the kids. This kind of high conflict divorce is what it is in the end, where I say there's one healthy person and one mentally ill person. And that's why the divorce is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I
don't mean not broken, because the healthy person is often very broken.
I mean, how can you not be? I mean, just in this brief conversation, as we've talked through these phases, of course they are. I mean, this is psychological abuse to another level, and their brain chemistry has been altered. So it's even deeper than I really even realized, because that
brainwashing.
It's brainwashing, right? Yeah.
Too, and I would say, I just hope that I see somehow laws changing, putting this more under domestic violence, that this level of emotional abuse with the intent to hurt another person, with the intent to create harm to that person, their family. It's the intent is there. And a lot of times they will leave a trail of emails and texts, etc., that there is proof. It's just that laws, when it comes to this gray, if I don't physically punch you, then I'm not, then there isn't physical, showing that I've caused you harm and damage. And furthermore, Heather, around this, it's like, if you're punched, and domestic violence is domestic violence. It's awful. It's horrible. But right. At least people can see what's going on. This is so covert, so
insidious, and it's just like, you can't
say this. You can't. Yeah. It's so gray, but it's not, because they have done research on betrayal trauma. Betrayal trauma is, and this typically are these kinds of cases where that the narc is typically done some kind of cheating, some time of coming out of the marriage, and that betrayal trauma mixed with the emotional abuse, they say, is worse on your brain than having been in a car accident. Like, they compare it to like being in war. Like, if they look at your brain and your brain, how it's altered your brain imaging, that it is far worse. And that's why the women are so broken.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it makes sense when you say that, because of all of these things. And, during this time, it's not like it's just somebody in passing or that you work with. I mean, you live with this person. It's constant. It is. And it built so much over time that I think that makes a lot of sense. The level of trauma and damage to your brain, like, to as you're getting out of this, like you said, and that you're so broken, and that's just so much. But we got to take another break. And Melissa, this is great though, because when we come back, hey, there's hope, right? We got to talk about that, because that's what you do. You work with people and you work with women to help them through this, and so do we. We just do it from different angles. So we're going to take a short break. Listeners, please take a moment to check us out on social media at 4Women Law on Facebook and Instagram, as well as Florida Women's Law Group on LinkedIn. And we will be right back. Welcome back to Women Winning Divorce. We are discussing Divorcing a Narcissist with Melissa Dionne of Jack's Beach Counseling. Now, Melissa, prior to the break, oh, that was so good. It was, I know, painful for women who are listening to this and you've been in it or you're in it now and you're nervous, but the phases were just great. And I did promise, okay, so we're going to talk about, hey, you're hearing this, you're recognizing it, you want to get out. However, I promised, Melissa, we could come back to this. So I'd love to start, as we do this last segment, the 12 questions. And I don't know if we were going to go through all of them, but I know you wanted to, and I did stop you and interrupt you. But I promised to come back, and I'm back, and I really want to know, because I know you're referencing Sandra Brown, which I've already ordered, lots of her books just to have a better understanding. But could you go back to that a little bit, because we don't want to leave our listeners hanging, and I want to know too.
Okay, so Sandra Brown is like asking, does this sound familiar to you? Because what's really hard, and even for families of women that are caught in this, that it's like speaking Spanish to them of like what's just happened to you. Like, okay, you can't really articulate it. So a lot of times women come in confused, like they say a lot, but it doesn't really make any sense. That's my first thing of like, okay, like, can you give me like a specific sentence? And usually they really struggle with that. So it comes with like obsessive rumination. When you've been discarded, you're ruminating about, how did I get discarded? Because I thought that you loved me. It goes back to that cognitive dissonance of that is the hardest part with it, which is connected to PTSD. Your brain doesn't understand how someone can come into your life and say they love you and all these things and then leave you.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. Okay, because your brain doesn't understand all the love, that you believe to be true and that they can then discard you. Now, but what about, does the brain have trouble making sense with all this love, but then all this bullying and bad treatment? Or is it more just that they've left? Because that is just kind of part of the relationship at this point.
Yeah. So I think because it's done so insidious, it's because it's done over time in pieces and parts, that it's not like I find a lot of times that they will articulate the bad behavior and not understand the bad behavior. Like, why would he behave that way? Why is he this way? Why would he say this to me? Right. And so they're trying to make sense of it. Like, oh, he's got an anger issue. And a lot of times they focus so much on him instead of themselves, because they're thinking somehow they're going to change themselves to make themselves be a better person for this person who is just manipulated and gaslight the mess out of them. Do you get what I'm saying? So that
I do. Right. So the rumination is more that they've left because they've probably been working so hard to be this person that they think he wants, which is just all part of the brainwashing and manipulation.
All part of the brainwashing, and the rumination can go on for years. It's a big part of the problem in healing. It's like your brain just still wants to solve the puzzle because you don't ever get closure. There's no like, hey, we didn't work out because of X, Y, and Z. They just leave. So what are they going to say? Like, oh, I've been brainwashing you for the last 4 years. That's why I'm leaving. Like, no. And actually, if they could say that, at least your brain could accept that, because they're blaming you for leaving. You did X, Y, and Z. They're going to gaslight you when they leave. Right. It's all your fault. I'm leaving because you did it. Even in cheating situations or adultery situations or situations where they've been using prostitution, they're going to blame you.
Blame you, right. It's your fault for what?
Not working out. So the obsessive rumination is about how am I being blamed? I don't understand. What could I have done differently? How can I change myself? Or what can they do to fix him? Do you want to go to treatment? Do you want to get yourself better? They don't sit down because of the anxiety and the depression that has been creeping along all along with this. And physiologically, they'll say they don't feel well. They don't know why. They feel heavy. They feel tired. Their stomach hurts. A lot of grief because they are grieving the loss of this relationship. It's like a death happened. So it's like, you don't break up in a normal way. It's just done typically. So when they do leave, it's like broken, done. You don't see them again unless they're hoovering you and doing weird things like sending you weird texts or sending you some kind of manipulative email that it's them trying to get something from you for the case. It's never like, hey, how are you? Are you okay? Are you doing okay? Now that's gone.
Gone.
So back to, they have a lot of intrusive thoughts and flooding. good memories and bad memories, because like still, you're right, you can't make sense of it. How do we go and have this great trip out west, but really this is what's going on at home? You isolate yourself because you don't know what else to do. You're having all this anxiety and depression. You know something's not right. You can't put your finger on it, but it's just, it's gray. Like it's just gray. Craving the relationship, even though it is harmful to you. This is important because this is the brain chemistry. It is like detoxing. It is like not having that love anymore is just earth-shattering for that person. And those that can't leave would say that's the reason why they don't leave, and they will put up with it because they don't think that they're worthy of somebody better.
Wow, that's just a lot. And I just feel for them because we've seen it. I've seen it in this office, and it's so hard because they're in it, and it has built over time and over time and over time, and they can't see themselves as for all that they are, and that this is not their fault, and that they aren't who they've made them believe. And I've also seen them on the other side, which I do want to get to, like to where women, they can overcome this through therapy and through really, time too, but to be able to begin to see themselves again as who they are and with value. And back to the original person, right, that the narcissist was attracted to, but like a lot of that person is lost. They don't even really remember that person, I think.
They don't. And that's what's said a lot of times. They don't remember that person, and they do get that person back. However, I don't know one person that wouldn't say they came to the other side of it and they're a different person. They're a different person because they've experienced just so much. It's like saying if you went to war and you came back,
Right.
You find your old person, but that person has changed. They've experienced a lifetime of things that have happened, and it does make you view the world differently. You see things differently. And how one of the things I say about even recovery, which just to put it out there, right? Like this is not a 2-month recovery. This is a 2 to 5 year recovery. This is a long recovering depending on how long you were in the relationship, but also to make sure that people don't jump into another relationship without fully understanding what landed them with a narcissist to begin with. That's really, really important.
I think that is very important. And I know, I certainly know from personal experience, my mother went from one to another before she was able to break that pattern. So, and that's where so much of my experience as living as a child with one and then seeing it from the outside, because it's much clearer. And when you're the outside person looking in and you're just like that just doesn't seem right. That's not what I would say normal, behavior and loving, and it's so easy on the outside to see it, right? For people who are in it, you're just been in it for so long. But, let's talk a little bit about for women who maybe just are listening now and they're like, oh my God, this is me. And I'm terrified and I don't know what to do. And they may come to our office. And sometimes they do, but it's still, they're not quite strong enough. They're not quite ready. And we always, I always recommend therapy because there's not a downside. It's only going to strengthen yourself. And if you decide to stay, you do. But regardless, you've got to begin healing and I've learned so much here today just to understand what's going on so that they're not crazy and they don't think and I mean crazy in the sense of the gaslighting, all the things that he's tried to make you think. And like we said, they've forgotten who they were and how they even got in this relationship.
All very true. That's all very true. And one thing, before talking about divorce, I just want to say this. All research, I don't care where you get it from, I don't care what book you read, the recommendation when you are ending and getting out of, and you finally can see that you need to leave to be healthy, is no contact. Not partial contact, it's no contact. It's no texting, no calling, blocking on every single avenue of social media, because every time you allow them to text you, call you, email you, you are exposing yourself to trauma. So that's really hard. And this is our next phase. When they decide if they're going to get a divorce, right? How do you do that when you have kids together?
Oh, yes, because it's impossible. It's not impossible. There are things that can be built in, but there are, most judges don't understand, don't even begin to understand. Hey, and I don't even begin to understand the level that you are in. I understand a lot, but certainly not from a clinical perspective at all. And, because that's what the judge said, why don't you pick up the phone? Why don't you pick up the phone? And I've known clients who've told the judge, because he told me I'm not allowed to call him. And the courts gets furious. They get furious with these people. And it's like, because they just don't understand. They can't understand from that perspective. And so what do you see? I mean, because I know from a legal perspective, like they're going to have certain obligations, and we've got to, there are things we can put in place, but there will be contact. We just try to minimize face-to-face and even voice, verbal contact to the extent you can. The courts don't understand. Most therapists, like you said, don't understand, and they can't help create a plan for people who, they say, well, you two just can't communicate, or it's high conflict, but it's so much more than that.
It's so much more than that. And one of the things I guess I want to ask, as I go forward in this, like in high conflict divorce cases, can we ask and find PhDs who can actually evaluate both spouses to determine if there is a diagnosis? Because that's your only way forward of being able to put definition around it. I don't know if judges part of developing some kind of consortium of people that actually know what this looks, breathes, and feels like, and how to handle these cases in a different way, because you're asking two people to communicate around children when one is going to do everything they can to destroy the other person. That's the disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So
it really is, because I think, and maybe, and it does, it sparks my creativity, juices, thinking, well, maybe there is a way. And of course there's always a way. We just have to, it starts with education. And then it would be from those individuals who have the knowledge, research, and understanding, because they've got to come up with a way that these children can be raised, and there has to be some type of communication. That's really where, at the end of the day, it ends up, because at the end of the day, they have to be able to communicate, because they are raising children, not together, but they are co-parenting. And it would take these experts to say, well, this is the way you ought to order it. It would have to come to that level, I believe.
So I think what's hard in this, and the only solutions that I think about or talk about, one is the idea of parallel co-parenting, because, can you have a parenting plan that is just so lock, stock, down to every minute of what the exchange is, what happened, what's your plan B, A, B, and C if this doesn't work out, that I know it sounds ridiculous, but as much as you can put in a document that says Joey is picked up at this time by this person, if that person can't do it, this person's going to do it, which sounds ridiculous. But in the end, these people just come back and forth to court multiple times. So it's like, if there's anything that can be done where little Joey understands that the parents are going to parent differently. They're going to discipline differently. They're going to parent differently, and just come to the acceptance that that's what it is, instead of forcing them to come together and co-parent together, which is never going to happen effectively. Like historically, right? Aren't judges like, I don't know who's telling the truth. Isn't that what it always comes down to? Who is telling the truth? And listen, how does a narc present in court?
Very well. We know they're great. They're wonderful. They're actors. They're portraying,
every day. This is what they do every day. How does the broken, spouse present in court?
Not always great. It's not always great. And that's, and sometimes they do, but yet, because of everything we've talked about in the show, and then much, much more, they've been through a lot. Trauma. It's trauma. And I really appreciate you clarifying that and making that a clear statement, that they have been through trauma. And so they are unable to relate to this person, and and their husband's unable to relate to them in a healthy way. And Oh, there's so much more, Melissa. You and I have got a lot of work to do if we are going to change things for women who are in these types of things going through a divorce. But it starts with educating.
Yes, I'm passionate about it. And it's trauma, but it's also defining it as abuse.
Yes, I think that's clear. Yes, that is a very important part.
It's abuse. It is absolutely abuse. And just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not abuse. Meaning physically hit, just because
exactly right doesn't mean it's not there, and doesn't mean it's not serious in long lasting and in a real thing. Yeah, for sure. Well,
and there is surviving it, and there is getting treatment, and there is getting treatment for complex trauma. And I am working on developing retreats and doing different things to help women heal.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that, Melissa. And this has been my pleasure. This is a heavy topic. I really appreciate all of your insight for both myself as well as our listeners, because it's important. And that's why we have this show and these discussions to really talk about these issues and help women really understand and begin to take the next steps forward. But lastly, before we go, I was wondering if you can impart on our listeners what you've learned about divorce and helping women and children throughout your career, to impart for our listeners.
I have learned to be a survivor. I have learned that there is life after this. I have learned that joy and happiness will always prevail in these situations. You just have to find it in your space and time. I love what I do. It's hard work, but I love it. I'm passionate about it. I'm passionate about changing just the rules and laws and how divorce court is done in these kinds of situations as best as I can, and educating clinicians. And that's what I'm passionate about.
Well, thank you so much. We have reached the end of our show, and I am just very appreciative. Thank you so much, Melissa. This has been a great episode. And I'm just going to tell you now, we're going to ask you to be back. So, because I know we are going to have so many comments and so much follow-up from our listeners. And I do encourage you, everyone listening, please let us know, because that'll allow us to bring you more content, more information on this subject. But for all of you out there, you can find more about Melissa at jaxbchcounseling.com, and that's JAXBCH counseling.com. And I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And before you go, if you liked this show, please leave us a review that will help other women find this show and this content. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Women Winning Divorce. My goal is to elevate your life and the way you are thinking so that you are best equipped to win at life. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe so you automatically get my new shows every week. And I would love to hear from you personally. Come join the conversation on social and join our Facebook group, Women Winning Divorce. We welcome your comments and suggestions. We want to bring you content that helps move your life forward. Women Winning Divorce is the place for an elevated conversation on how women can thrive during times of adversity in order to live their best life.